This is the Orthodox Experience with Father Michael Lilly. Today we will have a first of hopefully of many interviews. Today we'll be interviewing a actual parishioner of mine, Andrew Angyal, who is a recent convert to the Orthodox Church. He was received into the Church approximately 3 years ago, and he is a convert from the Roman Catholic faith. And so he's going to discuss with us the reasons why he chose to be Orthodox and his experience within the Church thus far. All right, so here we have Andrew Angyal, again, the parishioner of my parish, the Nativity of Christ Orthodox Church. And so Andrew's going to talk to us a little bit about his journey into the Orthodox Church today and see his experiences so far. So to begin with, Andrew, tell the people how it is that, let's start with your journey. Like, give me something about your spiritual background, your belief in Jesus. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I grew up Roman Catholic. My guardians were both pretty devout, old school Catholics. My uncle, who I lived with, he was a seminarian before he met his wife. So he spent 4 or 5 years at Sacred Heart Seminary. So faith was definitely a part of our family growing up. Even as a kid, I can still recall my dad sitting in his chair in his. They had a sitting area in their room, and he would pray the hours out of his old crumbling breviary from the 60s. So it was a really important part in our family, even from a young age. We switched parishes after, unfortunately, we witnessed one of the now infamous clown masses, and we ended up going around to the churches in Detroit and trying to find a new home because my parents just knew that where we were at wasn't where we were meant to be. And we ended up at a very old parish in Detroit, Grotto, which is known to a lot of the TLM, or the traditional Latin Mass crowds, and that's where I was raised. I received my first communion and first reconciliation at Grotto, and I ultimately ended up becoming an altar server. From the very beginning, I just knew that I wanted to be participating in that way, in a more active way. So I started doing that, and I continued that way through high school. Unfortunately, along the way, my uncle he passed away in 2001. But my mother, we kept going to the same mass that we had attended, 6:30 a.m. every Sunday for many years.
Early wake up call.
Yeah, it was. It was tough. I mean, especially at that age, waking up that early, it's awful. So I knew I could sleep about 30 minutes in the car on the way there, because we were driving from the suburbs of the Metro Detroit area, from Troy, all the way into Detroit, because the church was at like 7.5 in Gratiot, which is way in there. So yeah, it was a little bit of dedication to get to that. Around 15 or so whatever your sophomore year of high school is, for whatever reason, still something my mother and I never discussed, she just got this idea that I was becoming too rigid. Grotto, where I grew up, is a very rigid place. They didn't go along with a lot of the post-Vatican II reforms or changes.
When you say rigid, you mean traditional?
I don't think that's how she meant it. I think that she meant it in a way that there's a difference between a piety mixed with humility, and then piety and arrogance. Mm-hmm. And I guess at this point in my life, I could probably admit that I was probably becoming kind of arrogant. I turned my nose up at the Catholics who maybe did things differently, and I couldn't imagine having to go to a mass in another church, because it just wasn't the way we did it. Even if those other churches were, all right by most standards, I just had an attitude. So we started attending kind of infrequently, the National Shrine of the Little Flower. And what we would do is if we didn't, for whatever reason, go to that 6:30 Mass, then we'd go complete opposite. We'd go to 6:30 on a Sunday night to this National Shrine. And it was this teen Mass, which meant super, super loud music and just everything that, for me at that point, made my skin crawl. It was a rock concert of sorts. And it was very infrequent when we went there. And then eventually my mom worked out with a priest there that they were going to have some of the youth who attended that Mass invite me to come to their teen group. So this one random Sunday, we go to this Mass. I'm excited to be there. And then, I'm still a sophomore at that point in high school. These two young ladies come up to me and ask me if I'd like to come to youth group. So, of course, I said yeah. And I ended up setting up shop at that parish, going to that Mass because that's what corresponded to the weekly meetings. And, for better or worse, I found a place to be active there. Obviously, I wasn't serving anymore, but I was working with the youth group, and through them I did mission trips and all sorts of different events with different organizations. And that got me through high school, and as my senior year was approaching, I had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to look at going to seminary right out of high school.
Well, before you get into that, so tell me a little bit more about your high school youth experience, because I know for one about that time, sophomore year, high school, being raised as a Roman Catholic myself. That's about the time my relationship with the church and to being involved and with my faith kind of started. I would say it's fizzled. It fizzled. Right? You get confirmed. This happens so often in the Catholic Church. You get confirmed, and then you lose kind of a motivation. Your goal has been reached that you've been preached to, and then if you don't have especially if you don't have a good family structure to support you in your faith, you kind of fizzle. So even though you're in a new church and a new environment that is a lot different than your upbringing, what is this? Was it the youth group that kept you close to the church? You're being involved in that group. Tell us about that a little bit.
What kept me going and what helped me kind of look past the differences between a very traditional parish versus a parish that's very progressive, I guess you could say. It was making friends. And actually, it's the one thing that I didn't have at the former parish, where there was a very vibrant homeschool community at my former parish, which, really, you tend to, if you weren't part of it, you felt very excluded, because they did a lot of retreats and things like that. And you could tell that, in your downtime, it was clear, who was part of the homeschool group, who was always together. And the rest of us we drove in from the city, so to speak, to, participate at the parish. So being involved, it definitely helped. I had the youth group where I made, a number of friends, and we had all these just extra activities, whether it was, I guess it corresponded to a lot of things that were going on for me. Losing my uncle, who was, my dad in one respect and a guardian in another, really caught up to me in high school, right around that time. And the youth group, the people kind of kept my head screwed on. So that's when I started taking music lessons, I remember. And that really became a way to diffuse all those teenage emotions. And our youth director, Mary, she was also a great musician, and like on Saturday mornings I would go and work with her on music. And then I had a close guy friend who we could get together, but then we had all the other events. On the summers we did youth works, mission trips, which are like Appalachian trips. The parish had a lot of activities going on that we participated in. We had big festival fundraisers, all that kind of stuff.
So you kept busy.
Very busy.
Kept you busy. Being busy at the church kept you kind of had that connection.
But it was superficial. For all the busyness, you just never had time to realize that you're just kind of disconnected. And that was the one thing that, for me, as soon as I walked out of that environment, just like that, I just kind of, I just like, what was the point? And I can remember, my mom would quiz me because, there's so many churches to go to in that area, and there's so many that we were familiar with from, looking around for churches, before that, my mom would. I'd find out where my mom would go to church on Sunday, and then I would tell her the opposite. I went to somewhere else, and unfortunately that youth involvement, it keeps you glued while you have it, and myself and almost everyone I know from that has fallen away to one degree or another. Some people are they're outside of the church altogether. They became Protestant, they became atheist, agnostic. There's only one fellow I know who stuck it out, and he's actually in the seminary now.
Now that's a good segue, because you said you wanted to journey into seminary education pretty young, right?
Yeah, I really had intended to go to the seminary right out of high school, and it was kind of this thing that started when I was really young. Actually, the parish I grew up at had a lot of older grandmas and things like that, and they'd always mumble when they walked by me. Just remember when you get out of school, you go to the seminary. And I remember this one particular lady. She walked up to me, and she grabbed my hand. And she said, "Just you go to seminary, and they give you food, and they give you somewhere to go to the bathroom. That's all you need." And it stuck with me. And I just, it was kind of just like in the back of my mind most of my formative years. Like, you're going to grow up, you're going to go to seminary. So I scheduled a meeting with the director of vocations, who's kind of the gatekeeper to the program at Sacred Heart. And this Father Bilo was his name. We met, and they asked questions. What have you been doing throughout high school? Your grades, things like that. And he essentially told me at that point that he saw my best interest to go and just kind of live for a couple of years. I was self-admittedly I'm not a studious person. I don't like academics very much. So, they run an 8-year program, and he was a little concerned that I wasn't quite ready for that. And besides that, we just, upon reflection, just some lifestyle choices. The things that you do when you're that age. He said, like, he wouldn't be doing me any favors to go in. I said, all right, no harm, no foul. And I didn't really take it too personally. I mean, even to this day, I'll say it was a very fair assessment. I didn't belong there yet. But unfortunately, like, that was kind of the last thing that was kind of keeping me tethered a little bit. Because I always had in the back of my mind that, that was the pathway, and that was what was going to keep me plugged in, so to speak. So I went to a community college and started hanging out with friends and living life and working, and my church attendance really just, it dropped to nothing. And within about a year and a half, I would say, I fell away, to the point that, I took in my youthful rebellion, I took a trip out west to hang out with a bunch of Eastern Hindus and all that kind of stuff, and, that went on for about 6 months, and, I came back home with my tail between my legs, so to speak. Their system of thinking really didn't mesh too well with me.
Right, it must have been a well-lived experience. But so you're I would say that your faith was still there, but it wasn't strong enough to propel you to church attendance and to still continue to work in the church itself for sacraments and such like that, right? Is that fair?
I was on life support, and you don't know how bad it really is until it's over and you see how bad it was. So in that time period, not a lot really went on that was big in my life, but I had a coworker who I became good friends with. When I was 19, a fellow named Adam, and when I met him, he was a catechumen, getting ready to become Catholic, and it was ironic that he was kind of ascending and getting his stuff together, and very excited to go into the church. And then there was his friend me, who I kind of took it for granted, and I was on the descent. And he saw that, and the place I was doing what a lot of young people do. I was partying and fraternizing with ladies and things like that, and all that kind of crap. And he made a very respectable choice. He kind of started cutting me out of his life because I just wasn't a good influence, and I took it very, very personally. And one of my problems at that age is I was very hard-headed and very loud about it, and I didn't let things go. So it crescendoed in a very just bitter, nasty fight, and we didn't talk again. And fast forward, really just a matter of 3 or 4 months, and I found out that he had gotten cancer, some incredibly rare cancer, where he was driving from Detroit to Ann Arbor to the U of M to get special treatments. And at that time was when I was out of the church. I was cohabitating with somebody. My life was just completely screwed up. And towards the time that I went to California, he passed away in May. And I went to his funeral with my friends. And it was at St. Anastasia, and I remember one of the popular radio hosts or radio programmers, Father John Ricardo, was the celebrant at his funeral. He had been the pastor at the time, and he brought Adam in, and he talked about Adam in a very glowing way. And he actually had reiterated how drastic, how seriously Adam had taken that leap, to cut the bad things out of his life, and for his confirmation, saying he had taken the name Saint Valentine, because as he had phrased it to Father John, he was always in search of true love, which he finally exclaimed that he found in the Eucharist. He's very complete. He's very spiritually complete by the time he was near his deathbed, and it really it hit me like a bag of bricks, and it stuck with me. And I remember just a few weeks before, fast forwarding to leaving California, with my tail between my legs, I don't normally have very vivid dreams, but I had this strange dream of walking near this a church that I'm familiar with, and seeing priests and this friend of mine, and it had this resounding feeling of just like, what are you doing? And I talked to my parents, and I got out of there. And I went back. When I got back home, I finally decided that I needed to take things more seriously. And I started meeting with the pastor of the church that I had originally been at as a youth group member. And I really kind of was trying to go from that life support stage to a more active faith, which took a lot of work just to, even get to the point of doing that.
So from there, I since I know you well, I know you were married, and you and your wife attended Catholic Church, and at some point you had an interest in the Orthodox Church. And tell us what brought you to you investigate and inquire about the Orthodox faith, and what had or what led you there, and or were you being led there, or were you being pushed there? Tell us about that. What brought you to the church to learn more about it?
Yeah, well, like you said, I got married young, I guess by today's standards, 23, and my wife and we moved to Youngstown, and I was just trying to find a church. And I go to Sunday Mass at one place, I go the next week to somewhere else, and I just, I never got back what I had before I kind of fell away from the faith. That homey feeling inside you is just, it never came back, and I had a very hard time finding a parish that I felt like I was really a part of, but we picked somewhere and we stuck to it. Obviously you have to do pre-canon classes as a Catholic to get married, and I wanted to have roots somewhere, but I'm not going to lie, my faith life still wasn't very strong. We were missing Mass left and right and just going through the motions, but I kind of was at a strange place in my faith life. I didn't go to Mass very often, confession a lot, and, I was a regular on the list for the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel, but something just always felt disconnected. So I really started to consume a lot of information about the faith, whether it was, reading basic theology books, listening to Lighthouse Media, CDs, listening to Living Bread Radio, just all that stuff, trying to consume as much as I possibly could. And there's just, at the whole time, there's just always something that I just felt like there was something missing. So looking back, I realized I kind of encountered Orthodoxy through these little blips along the way. Facebook, of course, was a place that I went to a lot, with different apologetics groups and just associations. And there was one group that, while I was trying to kind of search for like the traditional Catholics, the Orthodox is in the title, but it never really crossed my mind that it didn't really mean like Orthodox Catholic. It meant like Eastern Orthodox. So I started encountering a little bit of Eastern Orthodox who I honestly mistook as just Eastern Catholics. And then places that I like to get different things from, particularly Monk Rock. They had a lot of Eastern Orthodox inspired. They sell prayer ropes and different books, and it just kind of lit the fuse a little bit that I was curious. Like I started to realize like there's a whole other side of the book here that I didn't realize, and I kept just unraveling that string. And there was a podcast that I listened to it for years. It was Catholic Stuff You Should Know, and one of their members went to Rome, so they needed a new guy, and it was kind of an association of priests out in Colorado, I guess, and they got I think some sort of Eastern Catholic priest. I think he's like Ruthenian or something, and he started injecting just these tidbits about the East, and they would do comparatives. One of the first things I ever heard that was different was they talked about like cheese fare and meat fare, these things I never heard of before, and I was very curious, and I knew that Youngstown was pretty rich in Eastern churches, so I really had to decide if I wanted to pursue Eastern Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, but I put it on the back burner, and it took from 2012 to 2015 really to really want to, or 2016, excuse me, to really want to pull the trigger on doing anything. I just kind of let myself stagnate. I would church hop, and I would go to one of the TLM parishes, but that just didn't quite hit me the right way. And I finally decided to approach Orthodoxy really in a moment of crisis. My wife and I, we had a miscarriage in that same year, in the fall, and we were devastated, and we were, in a lot of ways spiritually bankrupt. We had nothing to fall back on in that respect, and I remember spending so much time thinking that I needed something. We needed a church. We needed a priest. We needed a home, and I decided that I didn't want to continue pursuing to try to find a church within the Catholic Church. So I decided I was going to look at the Orthodox churches, because as far as I'm concerned, the Catholic Church had no legal problem with me doing that. So I said, why not?
So you're playing by the rules of Rome, right? Saying that the Orthodox Church is a valid church, so you felt your conscience was clear to go and check out an Orthodox church. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah. Okay. And it was very difficult, because no matter all the things I went through, I know there's no way I'd ever become Protestant, but I was very worried about fidelity to Rome, and out of all the things that I'll do, it was just something I couldn't. It wasn't a choice I could make to just break that unity. So I remember flipping open. I had my compendium on my desk at my house, and I flipped it open, and I used the index and found Orthodox in there, and I read line by line. I said, all right, good to go. And I reached out on Facebook to a group that had a lot of Orthodox members in it, and I said, I plan to visit this parish, and there's this parish that I drove by all the time by my house, and I said, I'm just going to start there. And I said, what do I need to know? Because I've never been to a liturgy in any other form than, the Roman. And, everyone told me don't worry about it. And then they ended up actually tagging you, and you and I conversed. And I think we started conversing before Christmas.
This was on Facebook, yeah?
Yeah, on Facebook we started talking. And I know we met for coffee, and then I kind of sprung it on my wife. I just kind of told her, right around Christmas or right after, I said, hey, by the way, on Sunday we're gonna go to this Russian church. And I said, I don't know what to expect. I said, for all I know, they probably just speak Russian, and we'll just see what happens. And we went. I remember, it's funny, we got out of the car, and I just kind of had these images in my mind. I thought I was gonna find like a little Russian village or something. And we started attending, and my wife was in the same place that I was. Like, we both just desperately, we needed something, and enough of, I guess, the Catholic times in her life rubbed off on her that she didn't want to go back to her, her roots of being Protestant, and she had never wanted to be Catholic. And if the Youngstown dies,
she became Catholic to marry you, right? Essentially.
No. She never converted.
She never converted. Okay.
No, we signed. We got dispensations that we signed when we got married, and it was highly odd to a lot of people because I still was really rigid about wanting to have a full mass for my wedding, even though my bride wasn't Catholic. But we were just in a place we were finally kind of on an equal playing field. So I was lucky that she was willing at that point to make that jump with me. And then obviously we ended up at Nativity, and my goodness, I think 5 months later we officially came in.
Yeah.
Started in January. and April that year we formally baptized and chrismated, and it's been almost 4 years now.
Yes. Well, I think I just saw Facebook posting. It was I think we brought you in as a catechumen.
It was last weekend some years ago.
Yeah, last weekend some years. I can't believe if it's 3 or 4. But so, what were the biggest hurdles you had to jump in order to get to the point where? Well, I know that just visiting is one thing, is making a visit, but getting to the point where you were going to now leave behind the faith you were raised in, even though at this point in your life it was kind of a rough faith, a faith that had been plugged with a lot of holes. But what got you to the point where, okay, I've got to move past this and come into the Orthodox Church?
It was real hard. I think a lot of Catholics have this trouble. It's the number one reason why the more devout, or maybe the more learned, however you want to kind of put that, don't leave, is because Rome, papal supremacy. It's almost this concept, I guess, in the back of a lot of our minds that all is good as long as it's coming from the chair of Peter. And it's unfortunate because that means we tolerate, or I tolerated and they tolerate still a lot of, just shenanigans. For me, it was a very slow process. It was kind of trying to look past that and understand that there's potentially a different way to see things. And the most glaring issues that I began to see when I tried to very academically look at the situation, because that's kind of my ironically, for someone who doesn't like studying, is to look at things very try to dissect them and break them apart. So I really started from a comparative standpoint, which was tricky, but theologically, a problem that I kept encountering was Catholic theology very routinely would, and if you looked at it chronologically, really started coming out of the Reformation era. Maybe 12th century forward. A lot of the formulation and what they do now is usually, or was, a response to someone else. The Protestant Reformers' response to the Great Schism with the Orthodox, and
the liturgy as well was they inherited. Even the Latin Mass was came out of the Council of Trent as a Reformation liturgy, right?
Yeah, and a problem that I kept seeing was this. The one barometer that I kind of held above even the chair Peter, I guess, was historical continuity, and that is a theme that I kind of encountered all over the place, whether it was through Catholic Stuff You Should Know, talking about these, what I thought were bygone practices, or, whether it was theologically, you get a crowd within the Catholic Church that says, if they would just go back to the Tridentine Mass, everything would be fine, but, the Tridentine Mass was reformed in the 1800s, and it was reformed, in the 15 and 1600s, and then when you get to 1200, they have an idea of what the liturgy was, and then they can only kind of recreate it using actors. It's not even like a liturgy that can be served. And it just was really lacking in continuity, and the theology was like that, the liturgics were like that, and I wanted to get back to, Monsignor Euston, my spiritual advisor, when I was younger, would always say, when in doubt, go back to basics. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back to basics, I wanted to know what Christians were doing in the 4th century because, they were at that precipice of really having things formulated out of, those apostolic years to becoming a church that had to function with the larger world. So they were going to probably have the most concise practices, and that just kind of, that idea kept pushing me toward orthodoxy. And, simple things started clicking, the Catholic Stuff guys would talk about, the vigils and prayer, waiting the liturgy. And it's like, wait a minute, I went to that on Saturday. That was the vigil that we just had. And I started to realize that all these things weren't gone. So it opened my mind up to see that there was actually a counter-historical perspective, because unfortunately, historically speaking, the Catholics kind of won. They are looked at as kind of the foundation of the Western world that we live in. So
that's the West understanding, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And they write the history book, so to speak. So they kind of control the narrative. And I realized slowly, like, wait a minute, it doesn't all add up. And then when you start reading, very early church fathers and the letters, and look at the different councils, you start realizing all of a sudden, of course, the Bishop of Rome always had a great place of honor just by virtue of, the chair they occupy, but it wasn't nearly what it's become now, where, we have a pope who reigns over all the millions or billions or whatever number of Catholics there are now. So the whole concept really started collapsing on itself. So that's really what pushed me forward. It gave me that motivation to really want to dial into the faith, because I had found where the breadcrumbs of continuity kind of picked up for me. And for me personally, that was one of the things that I needed to satisfy to really make that journey.
I feel like some Catholics that I've met that have come into the church, they have to break down the wall of the structure of the Catholic Church, the mighty church that we have to be subservient to, and not. And everything that we're taught as a Catholic has to be fed to us through a certain lens. We have to see it in a certain way, and to question that would all brings in light that opens you up to the orthodoxy. And from my experiences, I don't know if I've shared this, but I am a Roman Catholic convert too, and I've always said that there was nothing in the Orthodox Church that was foreign to me. And nothing that was foreign to me. In fact, that coming into the Orthodox Church, I felt I was being truly Catholic in the most pure sense. And so I think many Catholics feel that way when they come, and they can break down a little bit of these barriers that were set up by the Catholic Church themselves. Oftentimes the the papacy. How could the church function without the papacy? But once you realize that a lot of this stuff was built on over time, that if you just go back a little ways, you find the Orthodox Church. You find it. It's still there. It's still there. So, so you came in. You felt comfortable enough that you reconciled yourself enough with the Orthodox theology, the Orthodox practices, that you made it your home. So when you came into the church, usually, oftentimes, we get a sense of euphoria, a sense of joy, but that fades soon thereafter. Sometimes we also have temptations that come our way, because the Orthodox Church, as true as it is the one holy Catholic Church, it does have issues. And we have a past that also we have to deal with when we leave people behind from our past. So tell us about some of the things that you've encountered that have been a temptation, and how have you dealt with it? How have you and your family dealt with it?
Man, there's lots of challenges, especially, like you said, there's that euphoria. It's such a great time, just like when you get married, the world's perfect for however long. And then you have to realize you have to live with that other person for quite a while. Yeah. The first challenges really that we faced immediately was I always complain that there isn't always a cultural aspect to Catholicism. It can be a very Sunday kind of thing, Catholic on Sundays and do what you gotta do for Monday through Saturday.
Secular life, that is what secularity is, right? We separate our religion and our life. Completely
separate. And, there's no imposition really on you during the week to really do anything. I mean, you can pray the Breviary if you want, but you don't have to. You can do rosaries, or you can sign up for whatever activities, but as long as you hit your obligations, that term that they like to use, then you're kind of fine. Confess your mortal sins and go to church on Sunday, and whatever other days of obligation. So that was the first thing that we really had to struggle with is, the term day of obligation doesn't really seem to exist within the Eastern Orthodoxy. So living the lifestyle really was the hardest part. It was a joyous suffering. We were glad. There was a lot of joy to be tired from, what we felt like were just long services and a lot of services. But also, now there's this new fasting that I never dealt with. I mean, I did fish fries on Friday for most of my life, and I thought that was hard. So it was a big lifestyle choice, developing a prayer rule and trying to stick to it and integrating that into our lives, and not just integrating into our lives, but there's things that you kind of have to change lifestyle wise, and we had to learn to say no to doing things. We're both in our 20s, and Saturday nights we were going to vigils instead of doing whatever else, and trying to keep the fast the best we can, on the days that we really didn't want to, or maybe my mother-in-law had an event going on that we want to participate in. And that was kind of the first hurdles, and they coincided with that euphoria, and I give the kind of the euphoric high that you kind of ride after you're received into the church. I give it a lot of credit for kind of like help pushing us into it. I think it made it a little bit easier. So the next thing for me personally, I can't speak for my wife, that I really encountered was I kind of re-encountered doubt again. It wasn't all that long ago that I maybe had attended Mass or gone to Eucharistic adoration, or participated in those different facets of things that are kind of uniquely Catholic. And I still had a lot of friends who were part of the church. I was part of local Knights of Columbus and things like that, so I had a lot of plugs kind of still there, and that doubt kind of crept in, and almost a homesickness in a way. I'm like, oh, I miss Gregorian chant, or I wish I could just flip open my breviary because I'm familiar with it, or
nostalgia.
A lot of nostalgia, and in a lot of cases, it's funny. It was nostalgia for things that I hadn't had in years. I mean, I hadn't really used my breviary, and there's no grand chant to be found anywhere in Youngstown, so I don't know what I was getting so nostalgic about. But there's a lot of doubt that I make the right choice. A lot. It always goes back to that just being afraid. Am I the person who they talk about when they say they walked away from the Pope? In that kind of that snarky way, and that was the biggest hurdle for me. And even now, we're several years past the fact. You encounter periods of dryness and things like that, but the only thing that gets us through it is there's an identity now that I don't feel like I had before, where you could say you're Catholic, and it's kind of like, what does that mean? But now, the rhythm of life is kind of reconciled to our faith life. Even if we don't do it perfectly, there's still a balance of how you should be living, and we don't feel like we have secular lives anymore, really. And that's something my wife and I kind of often discuss, is we feel like we don't have these kind of dual personalities. We're Orthodox, and even if we stumble or we make mistakes, like that is what comes first. And we just had the conversation actually with my mother-in-law that Easter for the Catholics tends to come earlier than ours, and since she's not religious, we made the decision that isn't going to be a holiday where we double, and it kills us to be put in a position where we feel like we're breaking the fast a week before Pascha. It's just we reconciled Western Christmas and Nativity and things like that, and it's a little bit easier. But Pascha was the one thing we said no. If you don't have, in her case, if you don't have a religious reason to be celebrating it, then you can come to our Pascha. You're more than welcome. But we're not playing the game of doubling it up. This is what we do, and this is how we're going to do it. And it was received well.
So you're learning to navigate the family, coming from a family that's not Orthodox, and now you guys are trying to live the faith to the best of your ability. So you're learning how to navigate those landmines that you encounter along the way. That's just one of those things that we have to do, especially living in the West and as converts, right?
They can be really, really tricky.
Yes, they can be, and so you do it with love, but you got to be firm to your faith, So just to wrap up. I know that you also have had, we've met through online social media, and you have other friends that are online, and you've been very instrumental in working with people that have also are now interested in converting to Orthodoxy. So why don't we just finish up by, you can tell the world, what is your advice coming from someone of your background? Maybe they're Roman Catholic and they're having doubts, or maybe the church is not what it seems it was taught to them. It's totally different. Give them some advice on why you think they should come and experience the Orthodox experience.
Yeah, my best advice, and if I could go back and give it to myself, I would. The best advice I could give anyone is, a lot of us who are hurting in the Catholic Church because the hierarchy scorned us for being traditional and holding to the faith. We experienced the sneers and the ill feelings from everyday Catholics who thought we were strange and weird and all that kind of stuff. We're all searching for what we know to be the purest and the most true, and unfortunately that argument tends to stick between, am I going to go to the new Mass or am I going to go to the old Mass? And the biggest realization you can have is realizing that there's a third option, and that is the liturgy and the faith that has been handed down for two millennia within the Orthodox Church, that there is a full continuity from day one to where we're at now, that is free of a lot of those tensions that really cause a lot of pain to Catholics, including myself. We're not having this inner persecution by our hierarchy and our priest, because we want to live the best Orthodox lives we can. and it's very alive and well. So I would implore anyone to, even if you don't think you're going to make the switch, flip open your catechism and realize that you could still go visit, go look, even if you want to do it academically. There's no penalty to at least going and seeing, what, a little more ancient of a practice really is.
And you never know, maybe God will spark a flame, right?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, and couldn't have said it better myself.